Since the dawn of the GAA in 1884, the telling of its stories have been just as important as the sports. Through the years, heroes and matches have been immortalised, inspiring generation after generation. But some of its most important stories have also gotten lost or turned into legend. And in this series, we will explore some of the GAA's most fascinating forgotten tales, separating rumour from reality and myth from the truth that is often more amazing than the fiction. I'm Michael Foley.
And I'm Ciaran O'Hara.
So join us for Over the Bar, exploring the histories of the GAA.
Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
Hello and welcome to Over the Bar, our weekly sift through the best stories on offer from the GAA's history vaults. Ciaran, in another time, in another era, decades ago now really, we'd probably be talking about compromise rules this weekend, heading around Halloween time, you know, the Aussies would be over, that have played some kind of a warm-up game in Parnell Park, and we'd all be wondering, is this series going to be as violent as the next? So this all got us thinking, you know, about angles and what we could do, and we ended up talking about a man that's, I suppose, synonymous with the cross-pollination of Gaelic football and Australian rules. And then the question arose as to whether we actually knew as much about Jim Stynes as we probably should.
Yeah, I don't think many people in Ireland do really know a huge amount about Jim Stynes, because a lot of what he achieved is pre-globalization. Like, it's not in a period where the AFL's running in live games every week on Irish TV or satellite TV. Like, his greatest days were prior to that moment, but he's a pretty fascinating character. And I would say there's a fair argument that as a product of the Gaelic Athletic Association, he's its greatest crossover success.
Ooh. Strong words, but interesting when you consider, because I'm sure people who will see you say that, they will immediately think Kevin Moore, and they'll think of all the other AFL players, Ty Kennelly, Zach Toohey. If anyone has listened to our episode on Neil O'Donoghue, the first Irishman to make a career, he had an 8-year career in the NFL as a kicker. All these people will come into that conversation, but to your point,
I mean, in Olympic sport, there's lots of crossover. But
yeah, of course.
For me, we're talking about someone who went to another country and became a household name, playing a sport he didn't grow up with. Like any of those cases that you've just mentioned, Kevin Moran, yes, he was a product of the Gaelic Athletic Association, but he played soccer. It wasn't something that was alien to him. Sure. The Olympians would have participated in their sports growing up. This is a guy who, at a time when few had attempted it before, went to the other side of the world and changed the game he played, and for 1 year became its biggest personality.
Yeah. Well, let's set the case, and we'll come back to that big question at the end, maybe. Like, just to put it into context for me, right? I'm going to consider myself pretty average sort of a Irish bloke when it comes to Aussie rules, right? And if I watch it, I grew up watching it in the 80s and 90s when it was on TV, watched the compromise rules, international rules. Have I followed it since closely? I probably get interested towards grand final time and just, who's going well. Like, if I was to say what I know about Jim Stynes, I know I've read his autobiography since, but before that, I would have said Jim Stynes, he's a dub that played for the Melbourne Demons.
Yep.
We know that he's an absolute legend in Australia, sporting legend. Why he's an absolute sporting legend, beyond knowing that he played very well at AFL at Melbourne for a long time, I wouldn't be 100% sure. It's hardly for playing international rules for Ireland and Australia. Obviously, there's people will be well aware of the nobility and the courage that he showed in his fight against cancer for a long number of years. But this is a guy who has a statue dedicated to him outside of the Melbourne Cricket Ground.
One of the biggest stadiums in the world.
In the world. I mean, if I was to draw my contacts book and beyond for the right person to actually talk me through this story and bring me to that end point that you just mentioned, was Stynes the greatest GAA export of them all, I'd probably end up with your bad self, because you and Aussie Rules have what I suppose the US and the UK would call special relationship.
Yeah, we do, probably. Because I, like you, grew up in the 80s and saw games on tape delay on Sports Stadium and monitored the progress of Jim Stynes, among others. But it's pretty formative for me because at the same time I had family that had moved to Australia, and this was something at a time when there wasn't even the remote prospect of me seeing them in Australia. I saw something Australian. And it continued then into the 90s, where a colleague of my mum's was in Australia and returned with a VHS tape of the Jim Stynes story. And I inherited this once its use in the office was complete. And that began a fascination with the sport. And I would watch the weekly highlights show or watch Trans World Sport to see how things were going. And in the later 90s, got involved in playing it. And I'm not going to profess to have been a good footballer, but I played football.
Yeah, well, that's probably more than most of us, which makes you a good Aussie Rules footballer.
Played it here. Went to Australia for a while. Got my coaching badges. Came back. Got involved a bit more in football here and in Europe. But I've had, like, outside of Gaelic games, it's probably the sport I enjoy most. And I don't think that would have occurred had it not been for the fact that one of the dominant personalities when I first started watching was Jim Stynes.
So there we have it. That's there are your credentials laid out. So let's...
Well, credentials in so much like is any fan of another sport.
Well, they're more than most. They're more than most. And the point, I suppose, is that this guy, this is the whole... You know, I've said this a few times now in the opening episodes of this series. These are the kind of questions we're asking, and these are the kind of stories we're trying to drill into. That, you know, we think we know why Jim Stynes was great. We have a sense of it, but we're going to find out today now why he was great. And where I want to start is with a tiny little newspaper clipping from Halloween 1984. It's the Ballyboden St. Enda's club notes from the Evening Herald that evening, October 31st. It's a month after Jim Stynes has won an All-Ireland minor football medal with Dublin, partnering Paul Clark at midfield, which might be interesting to keep in mind for a little while later. And the notes begin with a very simple sentence that says, "Bon voyage to Dublin minor Jim Stynes, who is off to Australia shortly on a football scholarship for 2 years." And that's all it says. That's it. That is the beginning of this amazing career. So can you tell us a little bit about the kind of person he was, where he kind of what kind of person is he that takes this leap?
I guess a good place to start with this is, and actually at the time that note would have been written, there's a compromise rules series happening in Ireland. So there's a confluence of opportunity here in the sense that was the first, I think 1984 is the first year of the compromise rules properly. You've had the GAAs in the 60s. We have what becomes the international rules in the 90s. But the first proper iteration is 1984. They're touring Ireland. They've played a couple of games.
Games, in inverted commas.
Donnybrook developed a different meaning to us.
Yeah.
There's been a Donnybrook.
We just thought it was where you sent your postcards for anything goes. Turns out a Donnybrook and Aussie Rules football, something totally different.
Yeah, but that probably has created the circumstance in Australia that people are talking again about. There are transferable skills here in the two games. And something pivotal has occurred in the previous couple of years. The Melbourne Football Club, actually, first of all, just to establish the scale of the club, it is the oldest surviving professional football club in the world of any football code.
Wow.
Like it's fundamental to the existence of the game. It's members that create the laws of the game.
Right.
So it's a pretty big deal. But by the 1980s, it's a club in trouble. And at that time, what we now know as the AFL was not called the AFL. It was called the Victorian Football League. At the start of the 80s, 11 of the 12 teams are in the city of Melbourne, and one is in the city of Geelong in rural Victoria. So
and it's semi-pro, Ciaran,
and it's
right?
semi-pro. Like it's got much more in common with Gaelic football and hurling, in the sense of these are teams that represent the communities they're from. They're owned not by business people, and to this day they're not owned by business people. They are owned by their members. They are members' clubs. The only difference between the two codes at the time is that some of the players are being paid to pay part-time. And this creates a bit of an arms race. But what also happens when you have 11 professional teams in one city is they're all fighting for members in one city. It's saturation point. And at this point, they begin the process of nationalisation. So what occurs initially is the South Melbourne team, which is struggling most, moves to Sydney. Actually, in Jim Stynes' second year there, I think it's in 1985. And that's the beginning of what we now know as the AFL. But when he gets there, it's very much, it's still the suburban, it's Collingwood, Hawthorn, Melbourne. But the one that has the Melbourne name that isn't a suburb is the Melbourne Football Club. It's the one that bears the city's name. The rest are suburbs of the city, St Kilda, Hawthorn, Footscray. You go on. So he's joining a storied club, but they are in decline. They're struggling for members. They have recruited one of the club's greats, Ron Barassi, who had been the greatest player, arguably, in the club's history, and had been with them when they'd last won a premiership in 1964. He's now the coach. He had been on the GAA tour to Ireland in the 60s. So he knows the skills are transferable. When he returned from that, he introduced a running game to the clubs he coached, Carlton, afterwards, so he's taken things from the game. And then the final piece of the jigsaw is he appoints as their recruiting manager or their scout a school teacher called Slug Jordan, who, as the International Compromise rules is coming around, says, hey Ron, do you know what would be great? We could try and take a couple of these Irish guys over here. And we've already had this Scottish lad, Sean White. He's played a few games for us. He spent a few years in Kerry. Look how well he worked out. And as our Cordial Club listeners will know from their exclusive this week, Paul Early was already at the club. He'd gone out a year before and had been impressing them. Barry Richardson, who's the football manager, so effectively one of the other people that manages the list in the club, Ron Barassi, Slug Jordan, hatched this plan that they should go and try and recruit some players in Ireland. And they get a businessman named Peter Baines to fund that. But it's not, now we hear all about an Irish player might be in the draft or... It's not that managed. Like, that's why it's referred to as a scholarship. They go out, they give basically a stipend. Baines organises part-time jobs for them. They're working construction, part-time labour, community work, whatever's required. While over the course of these 2 years, they try to develop the skills required to play a game they know nothing about.
Love the free episodes of Over the Bar? Then take your passion further with the Cordial Club membership. For €5 a month, you'll unlock bonus series and member-only shows, hear the podcast first and ad-free, and get behind-the-scenes access through detailed notes, a newsletter, and Q&As. It's the ultimate GAA history experience, curated by Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara just for you. Upgrade your listening, support the show. Join today at overthebar.club.
You mentioned Paul Early there, right? So, was Jim the first, or was there? Because I know that we're looking at it, there's a couple of scholarships. Himself and a guy called James Fahey from Dublin also go over. So, are Fahey, Stynes, and Early the first, or you mentioned Sean White there, as you say.
But Sean White's family have moved from from Scotland to Kerry, and he's played a bit of minor football for Kerry or underage football for Kerry, and then they've moved to Melbourne. Like, Sean White was the type of athlete that wherever he lived, if he'd stayed in Scotland, he'd probably have ended up playing for Celtic. Yeah, he was just a great athlete, but he's the proof of the concept. James Fahey didn't stake it out. Paul Early did. Like, Paul's actually the first to play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought. He was quite early into it. Like, I mean, we're talking about Jim going over at the end of 84.
Yeah. But Jim's journey is different because Jim, you asked what type of person was he? Well, like, his athletic persona was he was a distance runner as well as a Gaelic footballer. He was 6'6", so his height appealed to them. Like, they thought, well, we can turn him into what they call a ruckman.
Which is?
Well, a ruckman traditionally in the sport, and again, this will give you an idea of his impact. A ruckman would go to, when we see ball ups, so much like a throw up in Gaelic football, these occur when the ball goes out over the boundary or if there's a stoppage in play. The ruckman would just get around the ground and contest those taps, a bit like a basketball tip-off.
Okay.
And that was the role that they had. They were big, they were cumbersome, they'd tap down to better players who would do the running. Ultimately, Jim Stynes is going to take that position to a different place, but not initially. So initially, he plays in what's known as the Victorian Football Association. They farm him out to a club called Paran, which is basically a Division 2. It's not even their reserves. There's a reserve competition, but he's not playing in that. He goes to Paran to learn his trade, where he'll have more time on the ball and he can pick up the skills. And this guy, Slug Jordan, is just crucifying him to make him better.
He's awful. Now, as I said at the top, like, I've read Jim's autobiography since we've decided to do this episode. It's called My Journey, and it very much focuses on his battle with cancer and that aspect of his life, with some references to his football career. But Slug Jordan leaps out from the pages. When he got there first, he just kept calling. I mean, and keep in mind, I don't know how many inches Stynes had on him, but Jordan would be looking up at him, calling him a bloody leprechaun, and slagging, like I just slagged Slug Jordan, slagging Stynes' accent. They used to love how Stynes used the word bollocks, basically at every last opportunity. It seems to describe whatever was going on. But in those opening, and these are the opening chapters of that particular book. It's interesting to me because this all plays into the story you're going to tell. I think it's a story of resilience. It's a story of not backing down from.
Jim Stynes is rocky.
Yeah.
Jim Stynes is rocky. Okay, for the period from 1984 to 1992, about Jim Stynes is rocky. That's what we're going to get into.
This should not succeed. This whole thing should not succeed. But I do want to just kind of paint the background a little bit, just of he's one of a family of 6. Obviously, people who were Brian, who went on to play with Dublin as well.
And who was also listed at Melbourne for a while. He played with the Melbourne under-19s in the reserves at the same time.
And I think played 2 games with Jim, I think, over the course. His father, Brian, when you read the book, his father, Brian's a tough taskmaster, but plays a very, very key role in shaping. He's a no-nonsense guy, but plays a very key role in shaping Stynes' outlook when times get tough, and particularly when you're going to Australia and having to prove yourself to a bunch of people who don't think you're going to make it. His Uncle Joe is an interesting guy, actually. Probably.
Actually, I knew. If there was one character from his background that you were going to embrace, I think, like, in this case, I'm just going to say, Mick, tell us all about Joe Stynes.
Yeah, I will. Briefly though, because this is about Jim, not Joe. But his Uncle Joe.
No, but it's absolutely about Jim. When you describe Joe Stynes, it is absolutely about Jim. Tell the story.
Well, certainly his resilience. I can't speak to his politics, but anyway, his Uncle Joe. First time I came across his Uncle Joe was doing research on Bloody Sunday 1920. He was reputed, and according to Jim family, he was a steward at Croke Park on Bloody Sunday. Now, at that stage, he was already involved with the IRA during the War of Independence. He carried guns for them and so on. Anti-treaty during the Civil War. He played for Dublin, played football for Dublin, to the point that he was on the county team for championship. He was actually interned 3 days before an All-Ireland final in 1922. So he was gone to the Curragh. But he came back when things normalised and the 1923 final was played. Dublin beat Kerry by 2 points. And actually, Joe Stynes scored the last 2 points that day. So he scored the winning points for Dublin in an All-Ireland final. After that, he moved to New York, emigrated, and became an accountant for Cartier Jewelers. And I mean, that would be enough of a story if he didn't decide to also become the secretary of the, it's the Prisoners' Dependence Fund, the IRA Prisoners' Dependence Fund. in America. And also, according to Jim's autobiography, dabbled in a bit of light gun running on the side as well, which culminated at one point in a neighbour called to the house and came in and was chatting with Mrs. Stynes. She was sitting on the couch and she couldn't get comfortable, so she shifted a cushion to try and improve things and found a machine gun underneath the cushion, which explained why she was uncomfortable and also gave her something to leave, go around the neighbourhood. A story got around the neighbourhood. Joe opened the door one evening to find a bunch of hoods with a hood. They covered his head, took him away, interrogated him a little bit, said, you got to get rid of those guns or else. And he said, well, I'll get rid of the guns, but I leave it to you guys to explain to the IRA where they're gone. At which point they put the hood back on him, dropped him home and said, listen, we'll just forget about all of that and we'll all move on with our lives. So Joe was obviously a character. His father, on top of that, played for civil service. You mentioned Ron Barassi and the GAAs. Civil Service Football Club in Dublin actually ended up playing the GAAs in 1967.
That's right. And Brian Stynes Sr. was playing in the game.
Yeah, which is an amazing quirk of fate, because when it came to the trial and the scholarship that he was offered, his father didn't want him to do either. So straight away, he's pushing against people who think this can't be done. His father doesn't want him because he's playing minor for Dublin. He wins an All-Ireland minor in 1984. He's in teacher training college. Things are lining up for him, as his father says. Why would you go to Van Diemen's Land? He says, what are you doing? Just when things are lining up. But they get around him. The Melbourne send a couple of guys to the door after the trials to kind of cajole the Styneses into letting Jim come, and his father reluctantly lets him go. Even when he went to the trial, he said, "Make sure you don't get picked." So,
And by the way, the trial itself is interesting because the other tall Dublin underage player that's on trial is one Neil Quinn. Known now as Niall because that's what the English call them. But Neil Quinn is also in attendance, so they had their pick of tall athletic Dubliners. And I mean, Slug Jordan's notes from the trial are quite funny. Raw but remarkable endurance and attitude. Great kid, has something.
So you mentioned he went to Paran for 2 years. We're talking 2 levels below.
Yes.
So his scholarship by 1987, his scholarship is over. So he has a choice. He can either go home or he can stick it out because where's he going to go? So he goes back to Melbourne, and it kind of, to me, Ciaran, it's surprising. It's almost surprising because it just suddenly takes off. Things happen. Spaces open up for him, and he grabs his opportunity.
That itself is not a coincidence either, because a number of the players that he would have been playing with as he came back from Paran and into the reserves and the under-19s have really started to develop. They're developing a team now. They've got guys like Gary Lyon, who would later play with them for Australia and captain.
Managed Australia, did he?
And coached Australia in the international rules as well. So, players like that are coming through. They've still got a couple of club legends around, and they've brought in a coach called John Nordy. So there's steady progress over those years that he is learning his trade. And by 87, he's in the squad, and he's making a sizable impact. He is getting around the ground. He's athletic. He can take the ball on the run. He can take it at his feet. He can catch it in the air. He can do the ruck contest. He's got outstanding endurance, and he has absolutely outrageous aerobic capacity. He's actually pivotal in 87 to them going on this run, which sees them qualify for the knockout stages to a preliminary final for the first time since they'd won that grand final in 64. He's one of the young heroes of the club.
And this preliminary final against Hawthorn, who are the kingpins of the era, they are the team to beat. They are the Dubs.
They're the ones we were watching on tape delay that we knew the names, Platten, Buchanara, Brereton.
Yeah, wonderful. Actually, classically Australian names.
Dipper.
Gary Buchanara, Robert Dipper D'Amico. The big Dipper?
Yeah.
John Platten with the big mop of curly hair. Looked like a member of AC/DC. These were the guys that we knew growing up with the stripes. Hawthorn played in stripes, didn't they? Kind of yellow
brown and gold stripes. Yeah,
brown and gold. Sorry, yeah. So this is the game, but this is also, Ciaran, you can tell the story of why this game becomes not just a steep learning curve for Stynes, but one of the pivotal moments possibly in his life.
It is the pivotal moment in his life in that the game itself, like the way the game goes, so the first quarter is quite balanced. The second quarter, Melbourne take off. Like they're leading well. Third quarter, I think by the end of it, they're leading by 2. And then towards the end of the game, they're ahead and Gary Buckenara marks the ball outside 50. Now, we'll see that if you've watched AFL, you can see the 50-metre arc in the oval. It's a hard shot.
It's a long way away.
It's a long way away. And I mean, it's feasible that if he takes the skin off the ball, he can goal from there and they win by 3. But what happens in the meantime is, one of the rules of Australian football is that you cannot walk across the man on the mark. So one player from your team stands on the mark while you back away from it to take the kick.
Right.
And he just loses concentration. I think he's following Dipper. He's following Robert Dipia Domenico, who I would say cleverly ran across the mark, because you can run across your own teammate's mark, and Jim Stynes follows. And the penalty for that is a 15-metre penalty. So it's taken forward 15 metres from 50. And now it's a kickable kick. And Buckenara, the siren goes, although I gather like there's 77,000 in attendance, so it's hard for them to know. But you are allowed to take a kick after the siren. And Buckenara takes the kick after the siren and he scores the goal. And Hawthorn win by 3 points. And there is a famous photograph of Jim Stynes returning to the locker room afterwards. And John Northey, who was a, red mustache, red hair, very red face in this photo.
I imagine he was, yeah.
Pointing at Stynes. And, the politically correct version we've heard is, don't you ever fucking do that again. It's one of those sporting photographs where you go, oh my God, he just must have wanted the ground to open up from underneath him. And that's for all the good he's done. So, in the aftermath, Nordy comes out and says, we're not going to be too hard on Jim. After all, he's one of the players that got us there, all this kind of stuff. But you can't shake that. And again, I come back to the point that this is now, okay, South Melbourne have moved to Sydney, but there's still 10 teams in Melbourne. It's still the heartbeat of the city. It's all anyone talks about is Australian football. And all they're talking about after that game is the dumb Irish kid that walked across the mark and cost Melbourne their first grand final opportunity since 1964. There's no hiding place from it. Like, he's just... So he thinks the solution is, I'll hide out in Europe.
Yeah.
I'll go on a bit of a trip in the off season. And he goes to, I think he goes to Paris. He's on the metro. An Australian tourist is on and recognize him as like, you're the kid that walked across the mark. And he just, that's the moment where like, now do I go back to Ireland and forget about this? Or how do I correct this? How do I correct this wrong?
Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
And this is the moment where I mentioned his father being a tough taskmaster, but a great believer in showing your resilience in adversity. This is where I suppose the lessons of his father and the lessons, to be fair, John Northey kind of bind together almost into a rope that Stynes can hold on to and pull himself back towards a career. Like, his father always said that you will be judged by how you react in adversity. And what Northey said to him in that time as well was, never end your career with regrets. So I suppose the message being, don't walk away now. Don't walk away now, because you will always wonder, what if? And Ciaran, that's the end of 1987. We could probably say in the next 3 to 4 years, he puts down the foundation stones of a legendary career.
Oh yeah, like what comes next is, and what has started in 87 is, first of all, he's played consecutive games in that season that he's broken into the team. But the amount of consecutive games he goes on to play is outrageous. He plays 244 consecutive games in the competition over the next basically 10 years. It's phenomenal. And I mean, he plays through some horrendous injuries. He punctures his lung and breaks a rib one week and just puts padding on the next week and plays.
Oh my God.
He plays through, he comes and plays having had knee surgery during the course of a week. His resilience is what comes to define him, that no matter what, that consecutive run of games is not stopping. Now, what that does for you when you're a fair-minded player is it gives you an opportunity to win the Brownlow Medal. Now, the Brownlow Medal is the big individual award in Australian football, and it's awarded to the best and fairest footballer in the competition. And
these words mean something, Ciaran, right? It's not just an expression.
No, these words mean something. Like if you were to be up on tribunal, which is the equivalent of being suspended, you're disqualified from the Brownlow considerations. So after each game, the umpires in the game vote on the best and fairest players in each match. So you can get 3, 2, 1 votes, the top 3. It takes an astonishing amount of consistency to win a Brownlow Medal. And in 1991, Jim Stynes wins the Brownlow Medal. 7 years after going there, he becomes the biggest name in the sport. And in the meantime, Melbourne, and by the way, I should have mentioned, in 1988, Melbourne did get to a grand final.
Mm-hmm. Against Hawthorn.
Yeah. They lost the grand final, but again, the progress has been steady. But 1991 cements his place as just one of the most phenomenal sports stories in Australia. So even in the States where football is not the predominant code, what you tend to have in Australia is everywhere plays cricket. Queensland and New South Wales play both of the rugbies, and everywhere else plays AFL. But his story is an Australian story. The Irish kid who came across and thrived at footy. And you can argue that it helps in the nationalisation of the game because the competition is now nationalising. We've now got teams in Adelaide, in Perth. Fitzroy have moved from Melbourne to Brisbane. They're starting to become what we now know as the AFL. And he is one of the preeminent names in it. And all the while, by the way, he's still part-time. He's studying in Deakin University. In 1994, the profile he has allows him with a friend, Paul Curry, to establish a youth-oriented charity, the Reach Foundation, because that's his great passion, is youth work. And, that comes back to when he first arrived, he had worked at youth work. He's achieving something, but he's not, it's not that he's got untold riches as yet.
No. And actually, just one small footnote to that Brownlow Medal season. I saw that at the beginning of 1991, there was a couple of ruckmen in for the position. So he was getting moved around to different spots to see could they accommodate both of them. Mm-hmm. So he was actually struggling to get his best position. And in fact, as a matter of fact, after the second game of the season, he was called in by the selection committee. That was interesting to me, Ciaran, that they have selection committees rather than...
So they have selectors. This continued until, I would say, the mid-90s. So what you had was the membership would elect... The parallels are uncanny. The membership or the board would elect selectors who would work with the coaching staff.
So the selection committee asks Jim Stynes to a meeting and then proceed to ask him to justify why he should be picked in the team. This is in the second round of his Brownlow Medal season. So again, even on the cusp of arguably his greatest individual moment as an Australian rules footballer, he is being doubted. He is being almost put back in your box, Prove yourself to us, suits sitting behind this table, Now, here's an interesting one, because obviously people might be listening to this and going, okay, Jim Stynes is a dub. This is 1991.
There was something happening at home, all right. Yeah,
there was a few bits and pieces going on, yeah. So Meath had come forward, won a couple of All-Irelands. 1989, Dublin come out, losing All-Ireland semi-final to Cork. Meath come forward again in 90. We have the Dublin-Meath Epics of 91, which Meath win. Dublin come out, losing All-Ireland final in 92, losing All-Ireland semi-final to Derry in 93, lose another All-Ireland final in 94 to Down, and finally win the one in 95. This is all going on through the peak years of Jim Stynes' career in Australia. And of course, in the manner of GAA exceptionalism, we are all asking, surely, in the late 80s and early 90s, when is Jim Stynes going to come home? This Australian rules superstar who is presumably earning a decent wage at this stage, we are expecting him to drop everything, I would imagine.
Mid-season, by the way. Mid-season.
And come back and play for the Dubs. Does this happen? Do the Dubs come after?
This happens in that period. Like, this happens in 91, where there's talk about we were going to bring him back, but he would have needed 10 days to adjust. You know, and you're kind of going, hold on, no, like he's not going to break his consecutive run to pop home, play against Meath. But it's the nature of it becomes to some degree like the Dublin story in that period, because they're struggling to bed down, like they've got a super team, but they're struggling to bed down a solidified midfield. And they think that he's the answer. So, like, he creates a Dublin story that is Hamlet without the prince. Like, so every time, Brian, you know, Jim Stynes may come home. And I mean, we could have ended up with a situation, because Brian did win an All-Ireland in midfield in 95.
He was midfield, yeah.
You know, if this contingent version of the world had occurred, we could have had both Stynes at midfield in 95. But his success is such that that's never a realistic prospect. Now, he does continue to play Gaelic football. There's a record of him coming back playing a few minutes for Bowden against Kilmacud in Silver Park. You know what I mean? He plays in Australia. Actually, an interesting footnote is, like, at the time, there's a good Gaelic Games competition in Australia, and they have these kind of interstate championships. So he plays for Victoria in the Australasian Games. And I remember interviewing Zinzan Brook, and Zinzan Brook saying, like, he played against Jim Stynes, the great All Black, played against Jim Stynes in the Australasian Games. I think they just knocked lumps out of each other. But I mean, Zinzan Brook was known for his foot skills as a number 8. He could kick. That was developed from playing Gaelic football with his best friend Bernie McCahill when they were growing up in New Zealand. And I mean, God, could you imagine now where, like, during the summer we're watching games streamed from North America to see all the guys going over. Imagine watching the Australasian Games to see Jim Stynes and Zinzan Brook playing each other. It was a different world.
It's pay-per-view stuff. I mean, the possibilities. And I mean, you know, you go back to that period, the early 90s, and Paddy Cullen is asked, Dublin manager, around 1992, are you going to get him back? And he said, I asked him. But, you know, and Stynes himself, when he's home, whether it's for a compromise ruse trip or it's on his holidays, he gets asked, and I'd love to come back and I'd love to play. But I mean, the reality is that, you know, he's building an amazing career in Australia. There is no hope. He's
also very pragmatic about it. He says, when asked these things, he said, I'd be in breach of my contract. You know, he has a playing contract with the club. Yeah. You can't just, do you know what, I'm going to skip 4 or 5 rounds here while I pop home to play for Dublin.
Yeah. wouldn't really wash, would it? I mean, It's a beautiful idea. The idea that having won his All-Ireland medal at minor level with Paul Clark, and Paul Clark is knocking around midfield for Dublin in that era, along with the likes of Jack Sheedy, Paul Beelan, Brian Stynes, as you said. You could have had Paul Clark and Jim Stynes back together, but you couldn't really. It was never really something that would practically happen. As very, very well said, actually, that the Dublin story is in many ways. Jim Stynes is that it's Hamlet without the prince. He's the one. He's the piece that's missing. But to be fair, they did win their All Ireland, and Stynes did get an All Ireland medal. So, you know, it's all okay, really.
Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
His career has so many highs with Melbourne. Now, they do kind of taper away again. They never get over the line in that grand final. In fact, it's only in recent years that they finally bridge that gap. And he can take some credit for that, but I'll come back to that later on, because ultimately, in another capacity, he becomes the saviour of the Melbourne Football Club.
Well, tell us that story, because I mean, he plays on till the late 90s, isn't it, Ciaran?
That's right. He retires in 1998 as club captain. You know, sounds great that, you know, an Irish guy captained the Melbourne Football Club, but actually he was the second Irish guy to captain the Melbourne Football Club. In their early history, there was a Monaghan man was captain of the Melbourne Football Club, and we may come back to that story some other day. But so he retires in 98. His last games are actually on the International Rules Tour that year. You know, and there's the pictures of him being chaired off the pitch. He's playing for Australia in that. He's played for Ireland previously. He's played state of origin for Victoria. He's thoroughly integrated within the system. And he goes away for a number of years and he concentrates on his charity and his philanthropic work through Reach. And this earns him immense credit as well. You know, he's nominated for Australian of the Year. He wins Victorian of the Year during this period. And by the mid-2000s, the club is really struggling again. The membership is dropping. The debt is at over $5 million. The president resigns mid-season and the board turn to Jim Stynes to come and become president of Melbourne Football Club. And he does. And he changes the culture of the club. He has a drop the debt campaign that wipes $3 million off the $5 million debt. He gets membership.
That's where Bonner got the idea, was it?
Yeah,
Bonner got the idea from Jim Stynes, right?
I'm sure.
Drop the debt.
He gradually puts structures in place. And the most amazing part of all of this is he's doing this while suffering from cancer. And it never knocks him back a step. He makes public appearances to drive membership, to drive sponsorship, to encourage a new culture within the club and lift them off their knees. And he's got the scars of surgery when he's making these appearances. You know, in many ways, it's his playing career played out in his administrative career. It's just the untold levels of resilience for him to actually achieve that. And okay, when they do win that flag, as they call them, it's a good few years after he passes away. But the groundwork for that success is laid by the culture he puts in place.
And he is remembered, I think, at the time. In 2021, I think they finally won the grand final. And he's remembered on the day. But at that point, he is an all-time club legend. He passes away in 2012 after, as you mentioned, his cancer. It's a harrowing battle. The book is well worth reading and to tell that story.
And actually, that's possibly when an Irish audience who weren't aware of his achievements became most familiar with them, because
I think so.
There was a documentary made of that struggle called Every Heart Beats True, which is a lyric from the Melbourne team song. And that was broadcast here. And I think it introduced him to a new audience in terms of an Irish audience. But I only interacted with him on maybe 3 or 4 occasions. 3 as a journalist, a working journalist at International Rules. And 1, the coaching course that I first did in Australia, he was our ruck coach.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, talk about being a little awestruck when your tutor walks into the room. Just a terrific human being. Can
you remember him from those coaching sessions?
Yeah, he was terrific, and it gave me an insight to what we see in the game. There might be a lot more going on. I'll put it this way: he was willing to show us how you might bend a ruler as well.
So he's an amazing character, and to bring it around to the statement that you posed, the rhetorical question that you posed at the beginning about Stynes potentially being the GAA's greatest export, if you like, to another sport. I'll make, having heard you there, I can see where you're coming from, because if we do look at somebody, it's people like Kevin Moran in particular stands out in football. Kevin Moran obviously has a tremendous career, but he doesn't have the status in the UK that Jim Stynes has in Australia, just as a human being, as a figure of worship, really, and somebody who is revered not just for his footballing impact, but for his social impact. You look at the other Irish who have gone to Australia. So in terms of the other Irish players who have gone out to Australia, like Stynes' record of successive appearances will never be broken. I would have thought, looking at, I think the next person up is like 40 odd behind him or whatever it is. But in terms of Irish appearances by an Irish player, has that been broken?
Yeah, Zach Tuohy has passed his record for most appearances by an Irish player. And Zach Tuohy in and of himself, while this will kind of illustrate why the roles that Jim had outside of football elevate him because of his social impact. Like what Zach Tuohy achieved is phenomenal. Zach Tuohy probably becomes one of the best kicks in a very technical sport. Like he's the guy that others model their kick on because it's so technically good. But Zach wins a grand final with Geelong. You know, we've had several players have now won in a grand final, which was the one thing that Jim Stynes didn't get to achieve. Ty Kennelly and Conor McKenna have won in both goals. Stynes' impact is about the fact that you could sit down in a rugby league bar in Brisbane and they'd be able to tell you who he is. Whereas you couldn't say that about most Australian footballers unless they were the biggest name in the competition.
Yeah. I think we're going to open this up to people, right? If you think there's a contender here that we're forgetting about, and there maybe is, maybe there's a rugby union player that we're not thinking of with a GAA background, but I just think in terms of Stynes' actual impact on Australian society, and that is it's a massive place. It's a huge place, and it's extraordinary that he could go out there and, as you say, almost invent a career, reinvent a position, and open up in a very serious way the doors for other Irish players and for more so maybe for Australian coaches.
But different types of players. I mean, the other thing that sets him apart is, like, when they see him, they see the 6'6" guy, they see the raw potential of a ruck. When an Australian club is recruiting an Irish player now, they're looking for running power. You know, they're probably thinking half backs predominantly or midfield runners. They're not typically looking for that type of player, but they're still looking. And I mean, there's now a lot of Irish women getting opportunity through the AFL as well. But I don't think any that durability, the 244 games, it's absolutely
amazing.
Ludicrous statistic. And as I mentioned, the injuries.
244 games, Ciaran. Yes, exactly. While nursing injuries, while also playing Gaelic football against Zinzanbrook and others in the off-season, and taking phone calls from Paddy Cullen to come back and play for Dublin, while also running a charitable organisation. There's a lot. He took a lot on those broad shoulders over the course of his entire career, and I think for all of those reasons joined up together, he has to be the GAA's greatest export of all.
Look, I think the one thing that probably lays it out in the grandest scale is the state of Victoria gave him a state funeral.
Yeah.
So in the state where the game is born, and with all due respect to the other football states, they'll all argue that they have a particular association with the game. But Victoria is where it began, where it matters most, where it dominates discourse for 8 or 9 months a year. And in that state, they gave him a state funeral.
And I think on that note, that is where we can rest our case for Jim Stynes as the greatest export the GAA have ever produced. Ciaran, thanks so much for walking us through that one. That was really, really well told, and just an amazing man on the sports field, off the sports field. And as you mentioned, documentary, there's books for people who want to go out and really delve into the story of Jim Stynes. There's life lessons there through his trials with cancer and the way he handled it with such dignity, and also the way that he basically created a career that should never have happened, really, from nothing, by sheer force of will, talent, of course, but absolute refusal to back down from any challenge that was put in front of him.
And if you liked this episode, do like, share, subscribe, send us your comments. As Mick said, like, if you disagree with us, throw out a few suggestions.
Please do.
And we'll get through those while we're waiting to deliver another episode next week. But if you can't wait until next week, if you need your fix sooner, you could sign up to our Cordial Club, and there we have our first mini-series for you this week. And episode 1 is available today for our listeners on the 1984 Compromise Rules series.
So till next time, Ciaran, thanks again, and we'll talk to you all soon.